Hey everyone, how's it going? It's been very chilly here in London. It just got very chilly all of a sudden. And apparently we're going to have a very cold winter after having a very hot summer. So I sort of feel like that meme of a dog in a burning building, with his coffee cup, and he's saying, "This is fine." But I had a very busy September, so I read 3 books that are now on the Booker Prize shortlist, as well as 2 books that were on the Booker long list. And I read 3 other new, really excellent novels, and then 2 older books. But first, I want to mention that it was my book blog's 5th birthday this month, and it's kind of crazy that it's been going for 5 years, and I've been doing this booktube channel for over 2 years now, so I don't really know where the time has gone, and I wonder sometimes, do people still read book blogs? But then I get really encouraged by people who leave responses to my blog posts and send me emails, and so that's all really nice and encouraging. And I really enjoy just having a book journal where I can just geek out and write about books for as long as I want. And I always try to include links to my blog posts about particular books in my wrap-up videos. So I'll link those below to all the books that I'll be talking about in this video as well, in case you want to read more of my thoughts about books. Also, before I get into Booker books, I bought a ticket to go to the Forward Prize readings this month as well. So this is a poetry prize it's a sort of series of poetry prizes in different categories, and there was readings from all of the shortlisted authors, so it was really wonderful, engaging evening of poetry and language, and it really enlivened my interest in poetry again. I don't read poetry all that often, but sometimes when I do, I get really moved by it, and it encouraged me to buy a few books of poetry which I hadn't come across before, of these poets who read in a really strong way. And I got to see the poet Richard Scott read, whose collection Soho is so good. That was wonderful. I loved getting to see him read for the first time. And I was so over the moon to see that Danez Smith won an award for poetry collection, Don't Call Us Dead, which is so powerful and moving. I've talked about it a bunch of times. It's one of my favorite books of the year that I've read so far. And, poets aren't always the best at reading their work, and that's fine. Poets don't need to be performers as well. But Danez is such a powerful performer, as well as the actual text. So let me give you an example. The couple sitting next to me just sort of sat there throughout this long series of readings, crossed-armed and a bit stern, and weren't really that engaged. But when Danez read their poem, they were ecstatic, got up, were clapping, were so engaged, as was everyone in the audience, and it was just incredible. And so yeah, that was a really wonderful evening. I was so happy to be there, and Jen Campbell, who is a judge on the prizes, she made a whole video about how wonderful the evening was, so I'll link that below as well. I also went along to the Booker Prize shortlist party, which was held in the Serpentine Pavilion. So the Serpentine Gallery in Kensington Gardens, they commission a pavilion every year to be created by an architect. And this year, the structure that they built has a lot of slats in it, and it's really beautiful, but it was a very windy night, and so the wind was sort of going through these slats, and as the evening went on, tables were getting blown over, and it was all a bit chaotic, and so which was just kind of funny. But it was a lovely evening, but it also felt a bit cruel, because the shortlist had been announced that morning, but all the long-listed authors were invited along, and not all of them were there, but a few long-listed authors were there who hadn't actually made the shortlist, so it felt a bit cruel that they had to go along to this party that they knew they weren't didn't get to the next stage of the prize, you know. But it was really wonderful for me because the author Sophie Mackintosh, who wrote The Water Cure, that I loved so much, she came up to me and thanked me for being so supportive of her book. And so it was a wonderful honor to be able to meet her and chat with her. And also, the author Belinda Bauer came up to me, who wrote the novel Snap. And she is one of the most lovely authors that I've ever met in my life. Like, this could have been one of those awkward encounters with an author because I hadn't read her novel. And but she was so lovely and warm and friendly, and I was talking with her and her boyfriend for a while. And it could have been very awkward at one point when she introduced me to her publicist, and her publicist asked me, like, oh, what Belinda Bauer novel is your favorite, or what of her books have you really liked? And I haven't read any of her books, but before I could awkwardly decide how I was going to answer that, Belinda sort of cut in and is like, oh, he hasn't read any of my books, and that's fine. He's just an enthusiastic reader. And that was so lovely and wonderful. Yeah, it was great meeting her. So enough chatter, on to the books now. And I have finished Richard Powers' big, long epic, The Overstory, which is magnificent. I think it's an incredible novel. It's not without its problems. It has like issues. I think parts of it don't all work together, and sort of some of the way that the storylines go is somewhat questionable. But overall, it's really impressive story about ecological activism and family heritage and surprising interconnections. It does start out like a group of short stories because you get introduced to all these different characters and these different timelines, which don't seem to have anything to do with each other. But then they gradually all come together, and so the shape of the novel is structured like a tree. So in the first part, you get the roots of the story, and then in the middle section, you get the trunk of the story, and then at the top, you get the flowering branches of the story. And all these parts weave together to say something much bigger about time and people's relationships with nature. How he portrays time in this novel is so impressive. So for like an example, in one scene, a character falls out of an airplane, and before he lands, there's a long description of the genesis of this whole forest, which is beneath him, and it shows the entire progression of this forest up until the point when he falls into it, and it sort of catches his fall. And so you get this sense of the progression of time, and also all of the subjects he touches upon. They're really varied and interesting in a lot of different ways, but it's still really convincing the way that he writes about them. Everything from the development of virtual reality to the drudgery of working in an Amazon warehouse fulfillment center. And like I said, some of the storylines work better than others. There's a whole storyline about a couple, which felt a bit cliched to me, but on the whole, like, so impressive. And I enjoyed this novel a lot, and it felt like a novel that was really long, but it really justified its length. You know, it like deserves to be the epic that it is. I read Everything Under by Daisy Johnson, and like I said in my Booker shortlist video, I found this novel difficult to get into because there's a variety of characters and storylines and timelines going on, so it can be a bit confusing at first, and some characters who change sex over the course of the novel. But her writing is so beautiful with really powerful imagery and this creepy presence called the Bonax sort of lurking in the background of the story. And the novel mixes a kind of forms of fairy tale writing and also a reworking of the Oedipus myth. It's about family and home and identity and gender and language and memory, and particularly the onset of dementia, and about fate And in the end, it just all came together in a really beautiful and moving way for me. So I found it really emotionally impactful. And then there's The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner, which is probably the shortlisted book which I've enjoyed the least so far, although there are parts of it which felt really effective and powerful to me. But I particularly enjoyed reading this novel and being able to discuss it with this mini book club that I have, which is made up of the writers Claire Fuller and Antonia Honeywell, and I get together every few months and we discuss a book. And so we got together to discuss The Mars Room this time, and we met in, I always try to theme our lunch spot around the theme of the novel, and so we met in an American restaurant this time, which has a real like grungy feel to it, and so it was totally appropriate for this novel. So the story is about a woman who's just been given 2 consecutive life sentences and is imprisoned, and she has a child who she's now locked away from. And she's been imprisoned for killing her stalker. And it raises a lot of important issues, and it touches upon some really interesting like philosophical points of view. But on the whole, the story just felt so controlled to me that like I just couldn't engage with it as emotionally as like I normally like to in a novel, for it to feel really effective for me. And I felt slightly uncomfortable in some parts where it almost felt voyeuristic, the sort of tragic comic perspective she gave on these imprisoned women's lives. But I'm still feel quite like uncertain about the novel. So if you've read Rachel Kushner and have a point of view about her, like let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to chat about it. Then from the long list, I read Sabrina, which is a graphic novel about a woman who goes missing and the people surrounding her who are left wondering what happened to her, and then the ensuing sort of media circus and lots of conspiracy theories that rise up around her story. It has such a melancholy feel to it in the way it shows the lives of devastated people lingering in big empty rooms, and they're portrayed with blank expressions as if they're caught in such a state of uncertainty and paranoia that they don't know how to feel or connect with each other. It's really effective and moving. And finally, from the Booker listed novels, I read Sally Rooney's second novel, Normal People, which is about 2 young people from different social classes who grow up in the same remote town in Ireland. And it's a really enjoyable and engaging novel that where for most of the novel you're just wondering, will or will not these 2 people get together romantically? And Claire from Claire Reads Books, on her channel, she made a really good video about whether this is a romance novel or not. So I'll link that below. And I think Sally Rooney does something really interesting with that genre. I really wish this novel had been on the Booker shortlist because I think it's great. And then, book prizes aside, I also read a few good new novels. So there is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, and a lot of people have been talking about Sarah Moss on BookTube, and like a lot of other people, I loved her previous novel Tidal Zone as well. And this novel is just as good, if not better. Like it's much shorter and more compressed and compact. In a way, it's the story of a girl who goes on an archaeological expedition with her parents, as well as a few university students and a professor. But it's not a typical sort of archaeological dig or anything. It's more like about the experience of archaeology. So they go and live in the forest and pretend that they're living in the Iron Age, and so they all wear burlap sacks and they go around gathering berries all day in order to have something to eat. And also they try to recreate these bizarre rituals of the bog people from centuries ago, which become quite bizarre and really creepy. So it's a suspenseful, really unsettling story on that level, but also it says something really powerful about Britain today and the differences between different classes in our society. So I think it's an amazing novel. Sarah Perry's new novel called Melmoth, and again, like a lot of people, I loved Sarah Perry's previous novel, The Essex Serpent. And so this new novel is about a somewhat reclusive woman who lives in modern-day Prague, working as a translator, and a couple she knows become entangled with this myth about a lonely, cursed woman who is meant to walk the earth with bloodied feet, called Melmoth. And the novel incorporates several different documents about people who've had experiences with Melmoth in different cultures. And then it sort of culminates in Helen having to confront her own guilty past and really ask what you do with your guilt when you're left all alone by yourself. And so I found it really meaningful in how it asks what you do, how you question this problem of guilt when you don't have a moral framework outside of because you're sort of outside of religion and the structures and comfort that religion can give. So I thought it was a really excellent novel. And by the way, I'd really recommend both Ghostwall and Melmoth as autumn reads because they're both quite creepy and unsettling in the tone of their storytelling, so they just give that autumn feeling. And I read Ottessa Moshfegh's new novel, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I enjoyed so much, even though it's about a central character who's very nihilistic and unlikable, but that's something that this author excels at. So the narrator is a privileged young woman who decides to spend a year sleeping as much as possible because she's in a financial position to be able to do that. And she is completely obsessed with the actress Whoopi Goldberg, who she rewatches all of her films in the brief moments when she's actually awake. And so it has characters that are just so engaging and that you just really want to read about, or at least that I want to read about them. And it's also set in over the years 2000 and 2001, which are quite significant to the central concepts and meaning of the story. So yeah, I just found it really perversely enjoyable to read this novel. Then I also read a book of short stories, which is Roald Dahl's Stories for Adults, and the stories in this book are all grouped around the theme of trickery. And so they're really inventive and enjoyable, and every story has a twist. And the type of stories where sometimes you can see the twist coming, but you can still enjoy it anyway. And I don't normally enjoy stories that have such a straightforward moral theme to them, and some of the moral themes in this are quite heavy-handed, but it's still really inventive and interesting. And finally, I also reread Virginia Woolf's novel Orlando, which I won't go into a lot here because I made a whole video about the joy of rereading Virginia Woolf again, because she is so inventive and intelligent and surprising. Her work still surprises me all the time, no matter how much I reread her. So I will forever enjoy going back to her work. So let me know if you have any thoughts or feelings about any of the books I've discussed. Like I said before, I'll put links to my full reviews if you want to chat to me on my blog as well. But let me know what you've been reading. Are you reading any of the books on the Booker shortlist? Or are you reading any of the books on the Goldsmiths Prize shortlist, which is a really interesting book prize shortlist as well? I would really recommend Olivia Lane's novel Crudo, and also Will Eves' novel Murmur, which I've started reading as well, is really excellent and beautifully written. But maybe you don't care about book prizes at all and are reading something entirely different, and that is fine. But let me know what you've been up to and what you're reading, and I hope you're well, and I will speak to you again soon. So happy reading, everyone.